Hi there, this is Dr. Rob Cywes, the Carbaddictiondoc, back with part 2, our second episode, which is kind of a back-to-back regarding the rules for intermittent fasting. Our take on intermittent fasting in a carbohydrate addiction framework. As you're dealing with your carbohydrate addiction, how does intermittent fasting augment and help that process? In the first part, we looked at the history and how we came to understand and create the concept of intermittent fasting. Today, we're going to look at how I apply it in my practice, help my patients to apply it in their lives. So, the principles of intermittent fasting are to remove carbohydrates, in fact, to remove calories from our diet for a long period of time. And the goal there is to get into ketosis during that time period. In other words, let's just stop for a second. There's another talk on this, but what is ketosis? Where should ketosis come from? And this is where I really clash very heavily with ketogenic diets. In ketogenic diets, you eat a bunch of fat to induce ketosis, and you can do that in a couple of days. But that's not what we're after long term. What we're after long term is to get our ketones, to get our fat-based fuel source from our own pork, from the fat that we've stored in our bodies. And typically for a fat person, that fat came from carbohydrates that got stored as fat. So if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to deal with your diabetes, you want to access that fat for protracted periods of time, but not the fat that you're eating, the fat from here. And that makes so much sense to intermittently fast, because if you're fasting, number one, your blood sugars come down, and slowly over time, you get rid of insulin resistance. And as you become more insulin sensitive, insulin, when the numbers come down, allow the enzymes in your fat cells to release fat. Insulin actually regulates something called lipoprotein lipase, the enzyme that is responsible for breaking down and releasing fat into the bloodstream. So when your insulin level is low, you can release a lot of fat and you lose weight. And when you're releasing fat and you're in ketosis, ketosis stops hunger, because your blood sugar is relatively low and flat, but it's flat. And you're burning fat, you've got plenty of fuel, and you don't feel hungry. So when you don't feel hungry, and mentally you're okay not eating, because remember, when an alcoholic says they're thirsty, I screwed that up. When an alcoholic says, I need a drink, it's not because they're thirsty. And when a fat person says, I'm hungry, it's not because their bodies need nutrition. It's because their brains need a moment of endorphin release. However, when you're in ketosis, your body's not hungry, and it's much easier to go a long period of time without eating. So the concept of intermittent fasting makes a lot of sense. So let's see how we apply it. What we do is we stage-wise help our patients to remove carbohydrates from their diet, from what they're eating and drinking. And as they go through those stages, at the same time, they're getting into ketosis. We also fat fortify our food. So yes, early on, we want fat to come from our mouths to get ourselves into ketosis, which helps with insulin reduction. And as that process happens, we don't feel hungry, and we can go longer and longer and longer without eating. Remember also, in the carbohydrate addiction model, a snack is always an emotional event. A bridge, my coffee, is something I can use to bridge across that moment when I need an emotional reprieve that doesn't contain calories. So the principles of carbohydrate addiction, intermittent fasting, are to go for as long as possible without consuming calories, so that you can use your own fat as a way to do that. But at the same time, you've now deprived yourself of a way to deal with your emotional needs, either little mind-cleansing moments or larger emotional tensions through eating and drinking. And therefore, it is critically important to find a replacement. So, while in the true while in the true intermittent fasting, the pure intermittent fasting, they do a non-calorie containing water fast. I have an issue with that. Because what am I going to use to cleanse my mind? Where's my coffee? So in our model, what we try to do is when we wake up in the morning, breakfast is actually the least important meal of the day. When we wake up biologically, glucagon causes our liver to push some sugar into the bloodstream, and we actually get what's called the dawn phenomenon, or a spike in blood sugar in the morning. You don't need to eat to cause that. Your liver does that. And as you become insulin sensitive, that happens. So I drink a cup of coffee in the morning just to kind of get me going. It's more for this than it is for this. Yeah, it kind of washes the snot and shit out of my esophagus. Yeah, I'm a doctor, I can use those words. It helps to clean the esophagus, but really nobody needs to eat calories in the morning. And then, in one of our other talks about bridges, I've created this as a bridge. Now, it doesn't matter what this is. For me, it's my coffee. It could be Crystal Light, it could be water. But what you want to do is to be sipping on that throughout the day and ritualize that relationship throughout the day. And because we wake up in ketosis, you want to ride that wave of ketosis as deep into the day as you possibly can, without eating, without consuming calories. And guess what that's called? That's called an intermittent fast. And you want to train yourself, you want to condition yourself to go as deep into the day as you possibly can. And if you have to eat at 11 o'clock in the morning, that's fine. If you can make it all the way through to 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, I don't call any meals by their traditional names, lunch, dinner, breakfast. I call them by a number. This is my first meal. This is my second meal. And typically in our program, if you can get to consuming your calories in 2 finite meals, where you're sitting at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork, and you are eating as an event with a start and a finish point, and that is your 2 ritualistic moments or time periods of caloric and nutritional consumption, you can isolate that into 2 periods of time. So when you've got that first meal and that second meal, I don't care how you shift it up and down. There's some days when I'll take my kids out to brunch and we'll have brunch at 11 o'clock in the morning. And then I might eat later in the day, I might not. It should never be a crime to have a meal. We have to decriminalize the concept of eating. Sure, a snack is not in the cards, but a snack is for this, not for this. So the ideal way to get into intermittent fasting is to not to do it in a rigid way, but to challenge yourself to get into ketosis and ride that wave as deep as you can, have your mind-cleansing moment substance, sip on your coffee, and whenever you need to eat your first meal, eat it. Make sure it is high-fat, low, close to 0 carbohydrates, and then have your second meal within 4 to 6 hours of that first meal. And I don't care how late at night you eat. Part of my own personal vulnerability, the time when I'm challenged the most to have snacks is between dinner and bedtime. That's part of my decompression time. That's part of my relaxation time. So what I found is if I can eat later in the day, if I can eat closer to 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, maybe an hour or so before I go to bed, it reduces that vulnerable time. So I may go on a busy day all the way through to 8, 9, 10 o'clock. Like today, I'll probably do that. 8, 9, 10 o'clock before I have a meal. Guess what I've done? I've done a 23-1, but I haven't done it intentionally. I've done it vicariously because I don't feel like eating and I'm busy. And because a meal is exclusively sitting at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork in our program, if I don't have the time to sit down, and eat that plate of food, I'm not going to die of anorexia if I skip that meal. So intermittent fasting in our program is a valuable, valuable asset, but it's not a primary doctrine. It isn't an exclusive thing that we do. It's something we do as a continuum of getting into ketosis and using a little bit of fat to get into ketosis with a meal, but really relying on our own pork, on this stored fat, as a way to get into ketosis. My source of fat is my body, not my mouth. So we try to do at least an 18-6 or a 23-1 by the IF rules. But really, it's not a rigid rule. It's just something that happens. I try to plan 2 meals a day. And if I end up eating 1 a day, I'm fine. So don't compel yourself that you have to eat 2 meals a day. If it happens to be 1, it's great. And just ride the wave of not eating as deep into the day as you can. And that becomes a very livable, very sustainable way to practice intermittent fasting as part of the fabric of your day rather than it is intentional, I've got to wait till 6 o'clock. Because there are times when I want to have lunch or that first meal at 12 o'clock. There are times when I can go through to 6 or 7 o'clock before I have my first meal. And there's social times when I want to have brunch with my family. And that'll be my first meal. And then I won't have my second one till later. if you make it a viable option, but you understand the concept, you can play with it without getting yourself into trouble. Now, when I go sideways, or when I want to drop 10 pounds, or I want to do something intentional, I may then add an element of not eating for a long period of time, a longer period of time. If I'm in ketosis, I'm burning my fat, I just don't feel that hungry. And yes, there's a degree of austerity associated with not eating in a particular day. But if I can do a 36-hour fast, it's really just not eating. But I'm nutritionally replete, I'm burning my own fat, I'm in ketosis, it becomes very tolerable as long as I've got my bridge, as long as I can take care of my mental needs with my cup of coffee. And then maybe doing something, going for a walk, playing some music, talking with my friends, going to church, doing something that is a mind-cleansing thing in a longer period of time that helps me to manage my emotional needs, where there's not a huge amount of pressure to eat for my emotional needs. I can start an event where I'm intentionally trying to do something with a longer period of not eating, 36 to 48 hours. Here's where I differ, and I absolutely differ with the intermittent fasting evangelists. I am very comfortable with not eating for a long period of time as long as I'm using my own fat as a fuel source. However, I never want to get into a point where I'm using my own vital nutrients, particularly my protein, as a way to supplement my amino acid needs. Because the human body doesn't store itinerant protein as amino acids. We have muscles, we store our protein in useful places. We don't have protein stores. And quite frankly, the greatest drive to eat is to get enough amino acids in. Because we can store fat and we don't need carbohydrates. We can make them internally. So one of the critical rules for me is do not prolong a fast for longer than it takes to use up amino acids and not have to tap into your own. And Steve Phinney, I reference him, and I are on the same page. Not eating for a long period of time is absolutely fine. But do not get into starvation. Starvation is where you start to use your own body's essential nutrients because you're not using your mouth. Starvation is a way to survive. It isn't healthy. For example, I'll give you an example. I'm a bariatric surgeon. I operate on people to get them to lose weight. It's a form of intentional starvation, comfortable starvation we call it. But when you look at the gastric bypass population, and I do not believe gastric bypass is a healthy operation to do as a first line. I'm very antagonistic of it. Yes, it loses a massive amount of weight, but 20 to 25% of the weight that a gastric bypass patient loses because they can't eat and because they're malabsorptive is lean muscle mass. And I never want a fat person to lose weight and become malnourished. And gastric bypass and duodenal switches are operations of malnutrition. Malnutrition. And that is not healthy. I do not want you to use your own lean muscle mass as a source of amino acid calories or amino acids for enzymes and hormones. I do not want my patients looking like Shar-Pei dogs, where they got all this flabby fat and skin and no underlying muscle. It's basically bone, flab, and skin. I call that a Shar-Pei dog, if you know what they are with a loose skin. I want my patients to lose their weight and be healthy from a muscular perspective. And whether you're doing that because of surgery or whether you're doing that because of intermittent fasting, it's absolutely fine, but stop before you enter starvation. Starvation, by definition, is we start to use your own body's essential nutrients. So there's another term that's become quite sexy and popular, and they call it autophagy. Autophagy. No, it's autophagy in English. Auto means self, phagy means eating. It means eating yourself. And yeah, if autophagy or autophagy applies to your own fat, that's fine, but that's not using your own nutrient supplies. That's using your excess stored fat. That's the whole purpose of that fat. But when you start cannibalizing your own essential nutrients, be they amino acids, be they your own nutrients, because you're in a state of starvation, that is dangerous, that is harmful. And like anything, enough is enough, but too much becomes harmful. And the issue that I have with the starvation people, the intermittent starvation people, is the harm long-term that they're doing to their body, irrespective of how they like to spin that. Can you recover from that? Absolutely we can. But is it a good idea? Absolutely not. It doesn't increase your improvement in disease. It doesn't increase your weight loss. Yeah, you may lose that weight with starvation, but you're going to have a rebound. It's going to come back. And nobody talks about the rebound, and starvation is unsustainable. So I love intermittent fasting. It's part of our program, but allow it to happen naturally because you're in ketosis. The concept of intermittent fasting should happen because you're not hungry and you allow yourself not to eat. As long as you are emotionally busy doing other things, you don't need to eat for the emotional value. And if you're in ketosis and you're burning your own fat, you're fine. But when your body says, hey, I'm having to tap into my own protein now, eat. Do not starve yourself. So I love the concept of intermittent fasting. Whether you start there to get into ketosis, I prefer getting rid of carbohydrates to get into ketosis, and then using intermittent fasting as the backbone for leveraging ketosis where you're not eating. I'm typically a 23-1, but I'm 23-1 because I'm not hungry. I didn't intentionally make myself hungry to the point of starvation because I only wanted to eat once in a day. I eat once in a day because I'm not hungry. A little upside down, but that's intermittent fasting, and that's our take. Love what Jason did. Love what the intermittent fasting people did, but step back and put it into context. And the most important part about intermittent fasting is if you're going to do it, if you're going to sustain not eating for protracted periods of the day, understand why you ate multiple times a day in the first part. It wasn't for nutrition. It was for the endorphin release, for the emotional management side. And if you do not replace carbohydrates and snacking as a dominant source of emotion management, you are going to relapse over and over and over again. Intermittent fasting is highly sustainable if you find other sources of emotion reprieve that you can practice and do throughout the day. Cheers. Here's my coffee. Go blue. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. If you did, please click the subscribe button and become a subscriber to my YouTube channel. And if that message resonated with you and made you think, and you made a decision to do more to help yourself, but you need help, please come and see us. Set up a consultation. We can do it in person in my offices in Palm Beach Gardens at 561-627-4107 or in Jacksonville, Florida at 904-410-3934. I also do some long-distance consults telephonically or on Zoom. Set that up as well by calling 561-627-4107. We help people to manage their diabetes better and also to get started in obesity management. Or if you've had bariatric or obesity surgery and are struggling, give us a shout. We can help to get you back on track.